Hi, good afternoon. What I'm going to talk a little bit about today is not necessarily around the technology of cloud, but around the impacts that as IT organizations and companies begin making greater usage of cloud, typically as they're going through some sort of a digital transformation. What does the IT organization need to deal with? And in particular, from an enterprise IT point of view, what are the changes and challenges that they are going to face? And, you know, I base a lot of this information. I'm based in Palo Alto. You probably guessed from my accent. I'm from Tipperary here in Ireland. But I'm based in Palo Alto, and I have two jobs. And my jobs are basically a Chief Development Officer for VMware, so where I run a big cloud for all of our enterprise software developers. So we've got worldwide infrastructure that I need to worry about. On the other hand, as a CTO, I speak to customers all the time. And I keep seeing this pattern starting to emerge over the last few years. If you go back a year or two, everybody spoke of bimodal IT, and they spoke of shadow IT. New sorts of IT emerging in the organization, which was different and separate from the traditional IT organization. And when I meet with CIOs and IT professionals, back at that time, they looked at this with some skepticism. What are these guys doing? They're kind of cowboys over there. What happens to security? How are we going to pull all that back into the core infrastructure of the company? What I am seeing now is a change in that. I'm seeing that when I speak to the IT organizations, they are realizing that they need to partner with these lines of business. We'll come back to that a little bit in a second. And equally, the lines of business who are trying to go through this digital transformation are realizing they have a heavy reliance on traditional IT. And that new trend or that change which is occurring is affecting both the technologies that IT need to worry about, but also some of the people side of IT. Who do you hire? What people do every day? How do people interact with, even internally within the company itself? So what's top of mind when we speak to enterprise IT and when I speak to customers who are looking at this problem is these two things. We see these new imperatives arising, right? And basically, as a company goes through a digital transformation, it is essentially changing the way that it engages with customers. So let's consider a company who manufactures tractors or something. You might say, that's a very traditional manufacturing organization. What has that got to do with digital transformation? But when that company begins worrying about tracking what's happening with engines and tractors, all the way to sophisticated connectivity around things like soil moisture, how crops are being planted, and so on. And all of that begins to be fed back in real time into a cloud, and farmers make decisions based on what they see there, and that company sells to those farmers advice about what they should be doing, how they should be dealing with particular parts of their land, and so on. That company is now an IT company. It has gone through a digital transformation, and its engagement with its customers is not primarily through the physical manifestation of the tractor or the equipment, but is around how they help that customer, that farmer, make more profit, how they work on their land, and so on. And that change fundamentally changes both the company and changes the role of IT within that company. So this whole concept of customer engagement as a key part of the digital transformation is something to keep in mind. When we look at some of those systems of engagement, over and over again, you just see mobile popping up. Obviously, that's how most people are going to engage with the companies for whom they're buying products from or working with. Then, on the other hand, when you look at what is the effect from a software point of view of that change. So, in an era when the company sold tractors, the role of IT was basically to run payroll. Maybe they had some SAP. Maybe they worried, about how do they deal with, accounting and so on for the organization. But they were very much a separate organization from what the organization was about. The company made money selling tractors. Now it makes money doing things like big data analytics, engaging with those customers in new way. And that means that IT is now at the very center of the profit center for the company. And that means IT needs to be able to move fast, it requires agility, it needs to be able to change fundamentally how it interacts with the lines of business. And what you see as a result of that are some of the things that are on the bottom of this slide here. Some of the changes that the IT organization begins to experience. They begin having to deal with bimodal IT. We'll come back to that in a second. Obviously, a lot of them have to engage with cloud, whether it's public or private cloud. One of the big changes you also see is a very high reliance on open source. Traditionally, IT organizations went in, they bought software from large enterprise software companies, ISVs, and they could rely on many years of support. They can rely on globalization. They can rely on security bulletins that they'll get whenever something goes wrong. Now, because of the speed at which they need to operate with and the way that they want to leverage new technologies, they've got a high reliance on open source, and that changes once again their relationship back to their vendors. We'll come back to that a little bit in a second as well. Finally, you see new technologies popping up all the time. Again, very much driven by these lines of business and the developers in the lines of business. The IT organization now needs to worry about new technologies, Docker, containers, etc. That changes how they manage infrastructure. So for instance, one of the classic things of an existing IT organization today is to worry about performance of machines or performance of virtual machines or the security of machines or the security of operating systems. That whole model begins to fall apart when you're dealing with potentially thousands of containerized applications. How does a human even connect what's going on in one of those applications back to some security bulletin? And so that's why the whole way that the data center will be managed is starting to change as well. There's like this impedance mismatch between what the IT organization does and what you're seeing in terms of the demands of the lines of business. And finally, as usual, you've always got worries about security. And if you go back to those conversations I used to have 2 years ago with the CIOs and the IT professionals, they looked at bimodal IT as a very scary thing when it comes to security. These people are shipping software which I don't really know where it came from. They're pulling in open source, which they just pulled in the day before. I have no idea has that been validated, what it means from a security point of view. And so security is a big issue when it comes to merging these two different views of the world. So essentially what you have is on the one side of this IT, worrying about all the traditional things IT would worry about. Security, compliance, performance. They got to worry about the economics of the organization. And the other side of things, you have the line of business. And the line of business is focused specifically on how do I win? How can I be competitive? How do I have a better product? And remember, the product now is itself the digital experience than the competitor down the road. And that means they need to focus on different things. They need to focus on differentiation, agility. Speed comes up over and over again. Why? Because in order to maintain that competitive edge, they need to be constantly maturing, changing, making those applications better. So they cannot wait around for a 2-year software update cycle. So they're constantly working in this continuous environment. Nothing new in this. This has been going on for the last few years. The new part is these things now need to come together. And we are seeing the beginnings of that starting to occur. We are seeing the IT organizations very definitely beginning to work with what was the shadow IT, and vice versa, the shadow IT organizations turning around and saying, I get it, when this thing is actually in production with, 1 million users, a security issue is a big deal. And I need to make sure whatever compliance and so on is put in place is able to balance between these two things. And that key issue there is the balance. The ideal model is IT gets to take care of the security and compliance to the level that they want, and the developers in the lines of business continue to be able to develop at the speed that they want and leverage the technologies at which they want. So what you're also seeing then is some of the effects of this in the infrastructure itself. Traditionally, IT worked a little bit like the story on the left. I'm from VMware, so I know all about workload consolidation. Our purpose was to take multiple applications spread across multiple machines and consolidate it down into a single machine, or do that across a broad data center. So overall, you're getting a massive CapEx savings in those data centers. But what you essentially saw was workloads coalescing into single servers or single pods of servers. What you're seeing now is more of an application distribution. And that goes back to the technologies which are being used, containers, microservices, and so on. This is more difficult for a traditional IT organization to manage. And so they're having to adjust to that and embrace new technologies to make that occur. To give a little bit more on what you see in terms of these applications, you hear different names for these, but broadly speaking, we call these applications cloud-native applications. So a cloud-native application in our parlance is an application which has been built from the beginning to take advantage of cloud infrastructure. You'll see the usual stuff, highly elastic. You'll see the use of containers. You'll see very much a dynamic, fast bring up and bring down aspect to that. You'll see redundancy built into those applications from the beginning. You'll also see new ways of provisioning those applications. The challenge that IT is facing today is that this is so agile, this is so fast, this is so elastic. You know, applications can move from one data center to another in terms of where something is being served extremely quickly. And the IT organizations are not necessarily ready to deal with that. So in order to deal with that, one, they're beginning to have to work more closely with the lines of business. Second of all, they're having to embrace new technologies. And as I say, I speak to IT professionals all the time, particularly enterprise IT, and they are very much starting to do that. And as you begin to see that change occurring, you also begin to see differences in how they manage infrastructure and how they very much worry about the security of infrastructure. One of the key things, for instance, we see in security is in the new realm of cloud-native applications, instead of having a very simple client talking to an application, talking to a database, that's relatively easy to secure. In a new data center, you have microservices, potentially hundreds of them. You have potentially thousands of containerized applications, all moving around constantly as infrastructure fails within that data center. And that's a really tough challenge for IT to manage. That fundamental change means you need to rely on new techniques, software-defined networking, for instance, to give you micro-segmentation, policy-driven infrastructure, where instead of you manage where the applications are or how you secure the applications, you associate policies with them, and then you allow the infrastructure to make those decisions automatically. Fundamental changes that we're seeing there in the mix. So when you're looking at these cloud-native applications and looking at the implication on IT, one other thing that's extremely important is the people aspect of this. In a traditional IT organization, you had the networking group, and you had the storage group, and you had the compute group. In the new organization, that's not the way. It's all around application management. And those old barriers need to break down. And you find that's actually one of the most difficult changes that the IT organization needs to make. How do they manage people through that transition? And so from that point of view, we're beginning to see a lot more focus on IT organizations and the DevOps teams beginning to really blend and understand how that works. A lot of what IT needs to really start focusing on is some of the things that I highlight in this slide. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip this, except to say that an SDDC, the software-defined data center, that concept is key to managing these new types of infrastructure. And it goes back to the policy aspect, which I pointed out. The data center itself is now too sophisticated, too complex, a mixture of public cloud and private cloud, applications potentially communicating across both of those, that to the most part you need to begin on the infrastructure itself to start making the security and workload decisions. Typically that's referred to as software-defined data center or policy-driven software-defined data center. So let's just wrap up here and think of some of the things that an enterprise IT organization really needs to focus on and worry about. One of the key things, you need to recognize that the infrastructure is no longer about the physical infrastructure in a data center. There may be no data center. All that data is coming from, all that infrastructure is based in the cloud. It's essentially software with all of the flexibility associated with that. The second thing is, the enterprise IT organization needs to very much listen to the line of business and needs to be prepared to disrupt itself. If it does not do this, the line of business will work around it. Remember, the line of business has one priority, and that is to be a competitive company, to make money, to be able to drive the customer engagement, to compete with all of the other companies going to digital transformation. It will not be stopped by an IT organization that gets in its way. And therefore, the IT organization needs to be prepared to support that. Finally, there needs to be an embracement of developers. Unlike the older world where you buy your software from an ISV vendor, now the core software, which is key to supporting the organization, is coming from a line of business within the organization itself. This is the core IT of the organization, and it is developed in your organization. And so you need to be prepared to work with the developers. And finally, IT needs to become that engine of innovation. It is now no longer a secondary organization dealing with a business process. It is responsible for delivering the digital transformation, and therefore it needs to fundamentally change how it works and how it innovates. With that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you very much.